everybody. I played as much as I possibly could during Steam Next Fest, but welcome back to the stream where we are hashtag not in the beta. This may make it a little less interesting to figure out what I'm talking about in the context that I am not in the game. I can't show you the game right now. Again, not hashtag in the beta. But that's fine. We'll just go back to what our old stomping ground used to be, and in this case it's going to be public-facing patch notes. The NDA has been lifted until March 11th. That means that there's going to be plenty of Stormgate content to watch and to follow in the meantime, so I wish you all the best of luck for that. And we can take a look at some of these other things here. So, first thing I'm going to say, it's not going to be popular. You're not going to like it. It's not going to be a thing that sounds good. Why the hell is this patch coming out right now? Like, okay. Why is this? There's an Elite Gaming Channel 10K going on right now, in which a slew of people have battled through the 512 Open qualifiers, and now this means that, okay, there's a couple of problems. One, this means the people who qualified on the 512 Open qualifiers played a fundamentally different patch than they'll be experiencing in the second weekend, right? That means that the Katowice players will be more accustomed to what the newish meta is of this game, because their Katowice qualifier happens one day before the 2 days that are the final part of the 10K. And then secondly, I heard something, that was an interview with Kevin Monk, right, in which he said, I don't know, and again, he stressed he's not the right person to ask about this, or he's not the most informed person to talk about this, right? But he mentioned in a conversation with Beowulf and one other person whose name escapes me at the exact moment, that they're very excited about the grassroots aspects of esports. Well, here's the thing. If you know that there's a $10,000 tournament, and like you said, you believe that it would be amazing to see that happen, why would you ever put a balance patch between the start of the tournament and the end of the tournament? We're not talking about an entire league. We're not talking about like a 4-month span where, there's got to be balance patches between the time frame at some point, right? This is 2 weekends, right? This is a total difference in days of about 10 days between each other, right? After the effects of Steam Next Fest going on, right? If this is the next patch notes, and it went live as it suggests on the 13th of February, which was yesterday, then what the hell are you doing? In as much as, doesn't this completely shit on the tournament itself? And for anyone who's not getting where I'm going, or not picking up what I'm dropping, let me go ahead and explain. So you have people who qualified for the event under one tournament system, under one balance patch, and now you're going to find out whether or not they're the best players in the world in Stormgate for the prize of $10,000 on a different patch. What the fuck is going on here? Like, this is kind of a mistake, in the same way that I see this happen all the time. I don't like it myself when I watch League of Legends, when I watch Worlds. I don't understand why we have a different patch that all of the teams qualify to Worlds on. Then there is a Worlds patch. Aren't we interested in who the best players are? Why are we having a separate patch that we could then put those people on? Now, I know what the first retort is going to be. Well, if they're that good, then, part of being good is adapting to new circumstances. All right, asshole, let's go play a game of chess, right? Let's go pretend that you've played a game of, like, you're playing the game of chess. You're trying to qualify. You're trying to do well. You want to play against these grandmasters. And then when you get to some event, like, and you see your first opponent is Alexa Varuja, or somebody like that, right? Or Vishianand. You go to fight your first opponent, and they're like, oh, sorry, chess actually had a balance patch. Yeah, not only does black move first now, but white doesn't have their D pawn. It shouldn't change too much, though. Like, it's still the same game. Being part of being a pro is adapting. What the fuck? Makes absolutely no sense, right? First off, if you know anything about anyone who has ever gotten very good at anything, a lot of what they put in is time, effort, practice. What helps practice? Stability, the rules being the same, right? What happens when the rules change wildly? Or when the rules change at all, or in this case you have a balance patch, the rules for people are different. Different skill sets get rewarded disproportionately, right? So if you play Magic the Gathering, there's a format called Commander, okay? If I'm playing at a CEDH table and I make a balance patch and I say, we're not allowed to play the color blue, that would be a ridiculous balance patch for the tournament, right? But let's say now, let's give an example where it affects people differently. Let's say you have a mid-range Stompy deck, and your opponent is a whole control list, right, with counter spells, and you say, yeah, actually, this balance patch, all instants cost one more, but being a pro is about adapting, and so both of you should be equally affected because you're both pros, right? Absolutely not. The person who's got a bunch of counter spells which rely on happening at instant speed has been drastically nerfed compared to the person who's playing mid-range stompy nonsense. It's a complete. I don't understand that logic of, well, if you're the pro, then you can get better on this day. No, man, that's not how it works. That's not how it's ever worked. You don't get to take the rules out from underneath somebody. And then really it just puts a dampener on the event for me. I'm not going to lie, because I'm going to be looking at this. Like, if we see any buffs or nerfs, and trust me, we will, Hellborne buffs, Hornet nerfs, Scout nerfs, etc. So what if you qualified on one set of skills, and now that set of skills has been completely destroyed? I don't get it at all why they would do this. This seems like, I haven't heard people complain about this, but I'm definitely going to make a separate video on this topic if this doesn't just go up as is. It is actually makes no sense to me that you would go on and make it so that there's a different balance patch for the people who are playing for money as opposed to what they qualified on. It doesn't make any sense to me. It seems foolish, especially since you don't have a thriving esports scene. You don't have, oh, well, we had to make a change. Well, we couldn't get in the way of the Atano Circus dump weekend daily or something like that. Like, no, it's not like that. It's not like there's 15 events and there's a weekend event every weekend, every 2 weekends for the entire year. And then there's this league that goes on over here, and it's impossible because you will always be crossing the streets. There's one major event you have to worry about from the public's perspective. I'm not speaking ill of the tanks here. Obviously, I think Attico is the shit. And I mean in a positive, he's excellent. But it just doesn't make any sense to me that you would do this. There's one event, one event that people know about, worry about, think about for the EGC Stormgate Open 10K, and you've just completely butchered the balance of it. Why? For what purpose? It was the one event you could have waited on, right? Now, here's the thing. I would like a statement or something like that to come by. That would be sick. If we get a statement that says, actually, it turns out that they're going to be playing on the previous patch, because that would be more in line with what's going on. So we'll see if we can't get some kind of reaction or some kind of question out of that. I just don't like, on the onset, if you don't think this is a big deal, I don't know what to tell you. I think it's a big fucking deal, right? If you don't think it's a big deal, then you're just not interested in seeing who was the best on the patch. You just don't care about the impact that these changes will have on the tournament. And that's fine, but then don't pretend that you care so much about the tournament, finding the best players, finding out the state of the balance, etc. Right? Make no mistake, tournaments are a proxy for balance wars and balance discussion. All right, with all that out of the way, let's go on. So, bug fixes. Let's take a look. High APM players should no longer experience full total client freezes late in games. This is good. I wasn't experiencing total client freezes, but I was experiencing severe performance issues. So, and I wouldn't say I was a high APM player. I can only imagine how much worse it was for other people. It seemed to be related to how often people were selecting their control groups, as in there were some games where I would be fighting someone who was nearly dead, and they would be microing their heart out with a group of Exos in Vanguard v Vanguard. And that would just make the game stutter and become a performant nightmare. So I'm glad that that's being worked on. That's good. Unit active abilities no longer have a negative effect on frames per second. Good, because medtechs, haha, that's the joke, right? Is that if you just make them enough medtechs, you would crash the game. Or if you wouldn't crash the game, you would render your opponent's micro inoperable. I want to note that this is in conjunction with a rollback that was done a couple of days ago now. This is separate from that rollback, where there were some stuttering issues and some frame issues that people were experiencing on maybe the last day of the Steam Next Fest. So this is separate of that. Bomb overcharge can no longer be cast on command posts under construction. So here's the thing I've learned as a QA engineer. You have to ask yourself, what's the difference between a bug and a feature? And the primary difference between a bug and a feature is whether or not it's intended, usually as outlined in a design document. So it doesn't, when they put bomb overcharge can't be cast on command posts under construction, it looks like this is actually just they've realized it was a bug. It was one that was figured out pretty quickly by the community. I don't even remember when I found it out. I just started trying to do it and it worked. But there's another reason that this might make sense is that this bug fix is probably not for that. And here's what I mean. There was a known bug fix that's in the Stormgate Discord that you can follow along. You can take a look at. If you're not a playtester, you can still follow in. If you're not in the beta, you can still follow in and pay attention to what's going on over there. And there was a bug where if you overcharge the bobs and then you pull them off, they fight, and then you come back to the construction, to the command post construction after they've lost their overcharge, you can't build the structure anymore. This is extremely frustrating. You'd have to cancel the building and then remake it, and you basically instantaneously lose the game. So this is probably a bug fix for that scenario, not actually a bug fix for whether or not command posts under construction could have their effects changed. Let's see. Launch sensor drone can no longer be launched from command posts under construction. This is a buff. You don't want, because the way that the launch sensor drone worked is that it would gather the sensor drone from the closest position command post, and it would launch from there. Now, let's say that you expanded over here, and this was under construction, and there was an enemy base this way, and therefore, let's say your other two bases are like down here, and there's a base over here, right? You wouldn't want the new command post to send out the launch sensor drone, so this is actually a buff because it doesn't give your opponent information they shouldn't have access to, because at high enough play, at high enough understanding, and at high enough visibility, you are actually just telling your opponent, yeah, in fact, I am expanding right now. You can kind of figure that out based on where my launch sensor drone is coming from. Shroudstone manifestation can be no longer cast near shrines or shroudstones that are under construction. Good. I mean, this is part of the bug list that was added into the handbook with the EGC Stormgate 10K Open, although I will say the rules of that tournament changed so quickly and so often that I'm going to get somebody to actually, maybe they might not want to do it publicly, but I'll get some complaints and we'll put them together, right? And you'll just know, if you weren't part of that, what the complaints and issues were. Although I will say in general for the EGC Stormgate 10K Open, it's pretty common for qualifiers to run into issues and then for things to be smoothed out by the second day. And then if the event goes on smoothly without a hitch, when it gets to Twitch or television, nobody really cares anymore. Sorry, not sorry. It's just the way it happens. Shroudstone manifestation can no longer be cast near enemy shrines or shroudstones. By the way, there is a bug where you could launch the Bob Overcharge on on your opponent's command post to give your opponent your own Bobs a buff. I never used it, but I saw that you could in fact do it. Shroudstone Manifestation is basically playing nice with the fact that Shroud isn't territorial. You and your opponent both have Shroud, right? So Shroudstone Manifestation was basically changed so that you can't just cheese the entire scenario. Fixed an issue where Nightfall Infestation could follow a targeted unit. This was the biggest pain in the ass ever possible, because the way Nightfall Infestation is supposed to work, in air quotes, is that you put it on an area, and then if you can get all the units out of that area, then your units aren't infested. I think Probe was the first one I saw talk about this publicly in the EGC Discord, where if you went ahead and you selected the Nightfall Infestation, you placed it on a unit, it would follow the unit and track it, and so that created a shit scenario where you have this giant circle on screen that says get out of this area, but what you really had to do was figure out, in that area, is my opponent smart enough to have picked a unit? If they are, take the unit that was closest to the center of that circle and send it away from all of the other units that are in that circle and get everything out of the circle. So you had two things you had to do to accomplish one goal. It was a massive pain in the ass. Nobody liked it. It sucked. So good that that's fixed. Health camps now provide the intended heal rate of 8 health per second. I suspect that they were at, what this is really saying, if you don't have eyes to see it, is it previously, in the previous patch from Devastator to Elephant, had gone from 4 health per second to 8 health per second. Now they put that in the patch notes, but I strongly suspect that they never actually changed the value from 4 to 8. Or they meant to change it from 4 to 8 and then something made it not actually change. It was hard-coded somewhere else, right? Again, pure speculation, hashtag not in the beta, but I suspect that it was half as effective as it was supposed to be the entire time, right? Fixed an issue where Lancers and Medtechs could unintentionally fit through certain walled-off areas, because there was an excellent video that came out on YouTube that said, secrets that Stormgate doesn't tell you, or something to that effect. It was one of those, like, top 8, top 10, top 5, click this, amazing thing happens, like, quick short-form content videos. Unlike me, with the short form content of a 4-hour review of the elephant patch notes, right? And one of those indicators was that Lancers are actually smaller than Scouts. Scouts, the dog that you start with, actually Lancers could squeeze through areas that Scouts even couldn't. Medtechs as well. And part of the difficulty with this is that you could squeeze through areas that you weren't supposed to have access to for scouting purposes, right? It was a big pain in the ass. The Magmadon's trample ability no longer affects area units. Again, we're going to talk about this in the EGC video that I will probably make, not tonight, but later tomorrow. And that is simply this. The Magmadon had a rule given to it in the handbook for the EGC Stormgate 10K Open, which was that you are not allowed to carry a Magmadon with the active trample ability inside of a Shroud Stone for the purposes of dealing damage. And people were like, what the hell does that mean? That's so fucking awkward. What's going on here? So if I can I carry it when it doesn't have trample? Can I carry it when it has trample if I'm not using it? What the hell does this all mean? And it was very simply this. The Magmadon, when it uses trample, it does this like stomp, 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 and then it does damage and stuns units in an area. Now, if you started the stomp and you loaded it into a shroud, into a Doombringer, and you carried it around, it would still, despite not being targetable, activate, deal damage, and stun units in the area. That's really bad, man. That's really bad. The Magmadon's trample ability can no longer affect structures. Listen, again, the difference between, they are calling it a bug fix, so I imagine they didn't expect it to affect structures, but I will say, when I was playing the game, I saw biological, light, heavy, mechanical. I didn't see a building tag, so I don't actually know how they could make this change previously to make it not affect structures, right? Code-wise, structures are probably different than units and held up under a different subset of rules. But in-game, in terms of tags that players could see, there's no reason we couldn't perceive that as a bug, right? Because it's supposed to affect things that have hit points that are of the following tags, and buildings don't have a unique tag, so... Alright. The Medtech System Shock ability now correctly dispels Infest. Thank God, because this was some wild bullshit, and that's the nice way of saying it. The whole purpose of getting System Shock against Infernals was that you wanted it to get rid of Infest, right? Especially if they brought the Nightfall manifestation and just kind of wrecked you with that. You would dispel it, get a huge burst of movement speed, it would help you clean up a fight, etc. The fact that it didn't get rid of Infest is just why. Infest is clearly a debuff, and so that makes sense that that's a block. The Vulcan's Jump Jets ability will no longer be blocked by an enemy corpse. This was actually known pretty early into the Steam Next Fest, because Vulcans seem fun. People like jump jets, right? It looks like a fun ability. So I understand why people ran into that. Okay. Now, balance changes general. So this is the part where if you didn't play a lot of games, or if you weren't playing and watching a lot of streamers, or you weren't yourself playing at a competent level, I'll say competent level because that's about where I would put myself, right? Less capable than most, more capable, well, less capable than some, more capable than most, but still not at the level I wanted to. Level 2 speed camps have been updated to spawn fewer goats. So previously the goats, level 2 speed, so previously in Devastator, speed camps were level 1, and then as part of the Elephant patch notes, they went from being level 1 camps to level 2 camps, and part of the reasoning for this was to make them stronger, make it much less likely that they could get killed. Didn't help at all. People would make a brute and a gaunt, and then they would just go, or a brute and 2 gaunts, and they would go attack the goats, and they would just have a great time and win everything. So, level 2 speed camps are still too strong, or still not strong enough to withstand very early infernal attacks, but the reason that they've been updated to spawn fewer goats is that previously they spawned 5 goats, and this is a worrying sign to me, because this says that the team is not willing to change what they did with gaunts, with making them have infest by default, or having infest affect creeps. And let me explain why that is. So, speed camps, the way that this works, and the problem that people are seeing, is that when you have these speed camps, the more creeps that there are, then a gaunt's ability is a glaive that bounces off of it and infests the unit. And then what this means in practice is the infernal player gets 1 fiend for every camp, right? And then the more fiends they have, the easier it is for them to take future camps, and then they just snowball across the map from there. So when you say that you're going to make it spawn fewer goats, that means you're okay with the Gaunt having the infestability by default. I don't agree with this. I think this poses a lot of problems. I don't really see what the problem was with having them have the infestability as part of Hemoglobin Fusion. I get that they want to move it as something that they have. I've seen a lot of suggestions for things like why not just make the infestability a tier 2 upgrade, which, spoiler, is what they had previously. So I don't like this because what this says really is speed camps are now easier to take with fewer units because we just don't want to give the Infernal players too many fiends off of the goats. So you have now made it faster to clear than before. They're still going to start with the speed camp because speed allows you to move across the map. It's the most overpowered thing you can give anyone inside of an RTS game. And the fact that you now, let's say they've lowered it from 5 to 3, right? They said fewer, they didn't say 1 or 2. So let's say they've lowered it by 2. They've lowered it to 3. If you get 3 fiends instead of 5, that's okay because that means that there are now 60% of the goats attacking your brute in the front, and that means that there's fewer effective hit points for your gaunts to chew through, and that their attacks are more concentrated. So it's actually easier now for you to get those 3 fiends with less risk than it was for you to get the 5 fiends earlier. And this just says to me they don't want to get rid of the gaunts infestability, which I think is a mistake. I think that they're going to eventually come around to changing that. I don't think that it's balanceable. As in, I don't think that numbers will ever fix the gaunts having infest by default. I don't think there's any way to do so when there's a design problem that I call it a design problem when numbers can't solve it, right? And here's why I say that. Well, what if the Gaunt only did 1 damage and the thing only moved 1 time? Well, that's a numbers change, yes. But when I say it's a design problem, you've just fixed the problem by making the unit useless. So it's either overpowered or it's useless, right? And there is no happy medium between the two of them. And this change basically says we're fine with Gaunts having infest. We want to play around in that space a little bit more. I strongly disagree that this is a good idea, but cards on the table, I play Infernal. Or cards on the table, I play Vanguard. Speaking of Vanguard, this is a thing where cards on the table, I think this needed to happen anyways. Right, it was just way too powerful, and we'll get to it right now. The Vanguard Scout, Beryllium Claws upgrade cost increased from 25-25 to 50-50. So for anyone who doesn't know, here's the build order. Are you ready? At the start of the game, you make 2 bobs. You send 1 bob over to Therium, and then when the first bob spawns, you re-rally from the Therium over to your Luminite. Then you go to 136. As soon as you see the wave of 4 bobs come in to put you up to 152, you do a bob overcharge, pull 2 bobs, go over and make a barracks. Once the barracks is finished, you make dogs. After about 3 dogs, you're going to be at 13 of 15 or something like that. You're going to pull 2 bobs still under the lasting effects of the overcharge. You're going to go make the biokinetic slab for 100 Illuminite, and then at 15 of 15 or very close to, you're going to go to 100, 100. And the reason you do all for a supply depot / habitat, and the reason you do all of this is that 1 bob you sent on Therium at the start of the game, it will have 25 Therium by the time your biokinetic slab is finished, and then you just bam start the upgrade. It's 25-25. It's absolutely cracked. And basically, by the time 2 more dogs were made, you're rallying dogs to the other side of the map, by the way, against Infernals and against Infernals and against Infernals and against Vanguard. Right, by the time 2 dogs get made, or another way of thinking about it is that by the time your dog that was just made gets rallied to the other side of Jagged Maw, Beryllium Claws is up. And the problem with Beryllium Claws is that it's plus 16 damage versus light, and units aren't the only thing that are light. Structures are also light. So in Vanguard v Infernal, it's pretty obvious. You would just wreck imps, wreck gaunts. Your opponent had to make brutes, or if they didn't make brutes, they had to make shroud stones and keep the gaunts tied up in a location and basically threaten to turn the dogs into fiends, right? And then, if they did make brutes and move out, you would just ignore them, take the rest of the map, right? And then you would just get all of these resource camps and vision camps and all of these other things that you were able to get all the pickups on the map, and you would have a lot of map control and presence for the cost of 5 dogs. It was a bit oppressive. And then the problem for Vanguard is that, like I said, buildings can also be light, and so Beryllium Claws meant that if you were just making a bunch of dogs but you couldn't kill your opponent because they had lancers, good news, everybody. You can just fucking wreck them because you have, you can wreck their habitats. How many habitats did your opponent have to make before it's a mistake? or before it's just too painful for them, well, it's 100 luminite every time. Pretty good. So also the research time increased from 30 seconds to 60 seconds. Good. They desperately needed it. You got the upgrade way too quickly. It was far too punishing. You could just listen. I I could have won. I was up to 1600. I'd say even 1650, up until like 1650 MMR, and that's just where I was soft capped, right? I capped out at 1681. I was able to win games just like, oh, surprise, I got the Beryllium Claws upgrade and I attacked both of your gaunts while you were creeping. Sorry. Oh shit. You just couldn't put your lancers in a good position. I played Ring Around the Rosie and destroyed all of your habitats and wrecked your workers as they tried to build a habit as they tried to build sentry posts. Sorry. Oh, your fast expand plan. Yeah, you were about 15 seconds too late on that. So you just lose the game. Really unfortunate. I get the sense they don't want that to happen, right? They want there to be more commitment to it. And the way that this would work now is that the timing of all of this would be thrown off because the only way you get the therium necessary is to send 2 bops to therium as opposed to 1. That means you're not getting your barracks and your estimated dogs, and if you are, you're not getting your supply depot as far. You're more committed. MedTech supply cost increased from 2 to 3 because, as fucking predicted, I said at the very beginning before I played a single game, while we were in Devastator and under the effects of the closed beta, right, and everything was locked down. I said the MedTech is the pre-nerfed double buffed version of the Little Wargame Priest, and guess what? It's a really good unit. It turns out you get its upgrade, and you cast it on a Vulcan. The Vulcan doesn't die, especially in conjunction with your shield. It is a worse exo in terms of straight up fights, but it is beautiful when you are just like MedTech Lancer is very good. MedTech Lancer is actually better than pure exo in terms of there's less micro that you have to deal with or to do. You could just always turn off the auto casting heal. Oh, by the way, it was an auto cast as well. Their stats were quite good. Their upgrades were quite relevant. It didn't feel expensive in terms of therium. Like, this is a very good. It could also, people were going for Hornets, and you could just use medtechs to rapidly like heal up a group of Hornets without having to pull them back to the hangar bay and waste time that way. It's all good shit, right? Mobilized Hedgehog. Okay, so the Hedgehog. So basically, they nerfed this unit out of existence, and so they're making it a little bit better. I actually think that they're just returning it to this state that they're returning it to the damage state that it had before. So let me give you some context. So Hedgehog, mobilized Hedgehog ammo recharge time decreased from 1.2 seconds to 1 second. And deployed Hedgehog ammo recharge time decreased from 0.6 seconds to 0.5 seconds. So they went from having a recharge time of 4 seconds for each of the 4 shots to 1.2 seconds for each of the 4 shots. I mentioned previously that this is a 20% nerf, right? Because we went from taking 1 second per shot on average to 1.2 seconds per shot on average, and this is just giving back some of the power and the numbers back to the Hedgehog, right? The Hedgehog now has gone from getting all 4 of its shots back in 4 seconds to getting 1 shot back every 1 second. Basically, this is all made to make the Hedgehog feel smoother. It has still been nerfed out of the ground. It is still a very terrible unit. I would still not recommend that you use it. Yeah, this is a minor buff, which is really in correcting something that it always had as a problem. There's not much more to say here about this. Vulcan range increased from 7 to 8. The reason for this is that they and Exos clumped up in a terrible manner. So if you had Exos and Vulcans, so to put this in perspective, Medtechs have a range of 9, and you would have them behind your Exos. If you had Exo Medtech Vulcan, you would have this weird problem where your Exos are actually getting in the way of the Vulcan, so you have to let the Vulcan get kind of towards the front so it can do any damage, but then it can't do any damage because now it's in a focus fire range, and it's in this awkward spot with the Exos, and it just felt awkward to move. It felt clunky, right? So really this is this is so that when you make the units and they ball out, you don't have this scenario, because this happened quite often, where if you just took a ball of units and you A-moved, sometimes the Exos would be in front of the Vulcan, and the Vulcan would try its best to path around the Exos so it could do some damage. If the armies were too large, it couldn't do that, so you just had a unit, this very powerful mech bay unit, that wasn't doing anything the entire time. So Evac, release Skymine cooldown decreased from 120 seconds to 20 seconds. Release Skymine now costs 15 Luminite. Skymines persist until detonated or killed. This is a massive buff and is part of the reason why we're going to be getting into Lancer Atlas for Vanguard v Vanguard. People don't think this, but I was seeing this even at my level at the 1600 to 1700 ELO or MMR rating about that RP as well. So evacs with Atlas drops were already becoming more common. We saw this exact same thing in the war game where the first thing people did with catapults was that they would make archers and then catapults. The problem that we had here is that people realized that while archer catapult is better as a death ball together in a straight up fight, archers themselves were terrible against catapults. It was better to have soldiers run them around, force the army to retreat, and then send them to harass your opponent. You could split off the army and it was much more microable courtesy of the airship. Let's translate all of that inside of Stormgate. So basically, now that Exos get two-shot by Atlases, we're going to see people realize that Lancers are much better because they're much tankier. They can do a lot more damage. They have more micro potential because of their speed. They don't have to be handled with such kid gloves. They can be dropped off more effectively. I think that we're going to start seeing a lot of we're going to start seeing more Lancer Atlas. I think that all of these buffs to the evac are going to prove to be a problem because you don't want your air transportation unit to be too strong, and this is going to make it too strong. Like the fact that you now get 6 times as many sky mines, and yes, it costs you some luminite, but they persist until detonated or killed. You can now set up areas of effect where you just say, oh yeah, fuck anyone who wants to stop my evac from doing its boosted as hell return to hangar bay ability. We're just going to set up sky mines. The only thing that can really kill this thing and quick enough damage from the infernal side is going to be the Shadow Flyer. Oh wait, the Shadow Flyer is going to get wrecked by the sky mine. The Shadow Flyers had to get buffed so that the sky mines from the Hornets, now the evacs, didn't one-shot them, but since you can set them and they never debuff, they never despawn, they just persist forever. One, there's a performance issue that may come about as a result of this, but two, it means that Shadow Flyers are going to get wrecked by these mines, especially if they use their ability to target an evac and then they follow it all the way back to the hangar bay. We saw that interaction happen a couple of times with Hornets. And I don't really know what the Infernal player is supposed to do once Vanguard players really unlock the power of this unit. This seems absolutely goated. And I don't know how many more. This is a huge buff to evacs and to this playstyle and to this way of thinking about the game. I don't really see how many more buffs you can give it without it being blatantly overpowered. I suspect that what's going to happen is that no one is going to pay attention to the evacs or these stacking numerous buffs. No one's going to pay attention to them up until the point that they start using it. Once they start using it, it's going to be oppressive and Infernals will have no way to counter it because you've put the Sky Mine onto the evac. So you've just given the evac the natural counter to the fucking unit that the Infernals want to use to wreck it, right? Oh, but Spriggans are very expensive in terms of Therium and not as fast as an evac, right? Well, worth thinking about. Hornet, Reclaimer Stinger's damage decreased from 10 to 8. This is a very nice way of saying Hornets are way too strong. There was actually an interview, and I referenced it earlier, in which Valmolf, Kevin Monk, and somebody else, or Monk and somebody else, I should say, said that, like, well, what do you think about Hornets? What's their role? And they were like, well, we want it to be an air supremacy fighter, an anti-air fighter with good ground damage. But unfortunately, it's just got really good ground damage still. Reclaimer Stinger's damage, good anti-air damage against light was what they were aiming for. So 20% damage nerf, hot take. The Hornet is still too microable, and I still don't really know what the long-term solution is for Infernals against Hornets. And this will sound harsh, but I think at a certain level of skill issue, Hornets are just a nightmare to deal with. I don't know how you deal with them. Like, Shadow Flyers feel like they could do something. Oh, wait, there's a Global Shield ability that can wreck. Oh, shit, actually, that just relies on your opponent not splitting their Hornets. Once people are splitting Hornets, I don't really know what Infernal is supposed to do against them. Gaunts lose 1v1 against Hornets. Gaunts can lose 2v1 against 2v2 against Hornets as well. And I think they even lose 3v2 against Hornets, despite focus fire on both sides, courtesy of the speed boost from the return to hangar ability. I actually think that that's going to be the nerf. That's going point that you need to give Hornets is that the return to hanger ability is what makes it too strong. At a certain level of competency in play, the fact that you get a 30, 35, 50, 100% speed boost to your Hornet as soon as it might be taking lethal damage to run away, it just asks too much of the player, right? Of the defending player to do enough damage to actually defend against it. Flat cannon anti-air attack range increased from 10 to 12. This is the fancy way of saying that we're sorry we over-nerfed the flat cannon. Also, air units are still good in our game despite what we were trying to do previously. It's 100% what this says. If you don't understand that, then I don't know what to tell you. That's just the reality of it. Yeah, anti-air attack range increased from 10 to 12. Attacking an air unit will not only deal splash damage to other air units. This is also to help with the problem of Hornets, like 1-base Hornets or 2-base Hornets, and Vanguard v Vanguard, right? Because you could get to a scenario where the anti-air attack range was not actually enough to defend both your Luminite and your Therium, and then that meant that the resource you had to know very precise locations of where to put your turrets, and even so, the Hornets could still snipe some workers, some bobs on the outside range, right? This also says that we're really sorry that Spriggans and Doombringers can do what they do. And for those who don't understand what that means, Doombringers are air units up until the point that they land. Gaunt drops were still pretty popular. This is, I think, a trickle-down effect from the videos that we saw in the games that we saw from the Elephant list, or from the Elephant patch list, rather, that we saw from the developers and the games that they were playing before the Steam Deck Fest. So a lot of people realized that looked really strong, started using it, and it became a problem. Same problem, by the way, because once again, the Doombringer isn't the problem. The fact that the Doombringer lands and then makes gaunts, and then those gaunts are in an area that's really strong was the problem. Oh, my nose. All right. Infernals. This is just going to be the fact. Okay, guys, the fact that Hellspawn Resurgence had an Animus cost of 10 or 15 ever was a colossal joke, right? So I want you to keep in mind, this was nerfed by 60%. Mom, cats. That's what it is. Wonderful. So this was nerfed by 60% from 15 to 25, and that was nerfed again from 25 to 40, which is more than a 50% increase in what its problems were previously. It's, by the way, it is still going to be too strong. No one wants to hear this, but in Hellspawn Resurgence Animus cost, this is just a very broken ability, right? It's one of these things that, because it breaks the card system, it breaks the respawn, reload, unit production system of the game in favor of Infernals. 40 is probably still not enough of a nerf. I actually think we're going to see its final resting place end up being like 60 or 65. Because 40 supply, when you consider that as an Infernal player, you're always receiving Animus courtesy of your Fellhogs dying every 20 seconds, right? So you're always receiving Animus passively, basically. Every meat farm is passively generating you Animus through the entire game. Right? And then when you consider that, as long as your economy can withstand it, this is probably just the best thing you could do with 40 Luminite. This is better than Nightshade Infestation. This is better than Shroudstone Manifestation. Unless you are about to die, it's better than Shroudstone Manifestation, right? And if you're about to die, Shroudstone Manifestation is only narrowly going to keep you alive, right? That 30% buff is probably not enough. So I think that Hellspawn Resurgence Animus cost is nerfed, but it doesn't matter. Like, the fact that it is broken at 25, it's not any less broken at 40, right? I know that sounds weird, but breaking the card system, because you make a unit in 0.5 seconds after you've generated enough resources to actually make it, right? Restoring all of your cards just means as long as you have the money, you can make all of the units that you want to. This is way too strong of an ability. We will probably find it gated by more tech and more Animus cost in the future. For now, if you're an Infernals player, you sigh, say that they've realized that it's really strong, laugh, and then keep using it anyways. It's way too good. Inflamed Imp damage decreased from 100 plus 100 versus structures to 100 plus 50 versus structures. Basically, we're really sorry that Inflamed Imps are actually now Banelings that can Baneling bust people, and we didn't mean for that to actually happen. That's what this says. Okay. Basically, this also is when people say, well, why don't you just wall off as Vanguard versus Infernal? This is one of the reasons that that's not going to happen very easily, is that the bonus damage of the Inflamed Imps. So what this means now is that you are doing 200 damage instead, 150 damage instead of 200. So you now need 4 Imps, whereas previously you needed 3. And the reason that this matters is that 3 Imps is something that you could conceivably stack up card value for and get. So, fine. Brute. The Sunder Soul ability now grants Spawn Fiends max white health. Okay, and we're going to read these together. And all Fiends start with 0 white health by default, down from 7.5. So, I really like this change. This is very good. It was very hard to understand what the reasoning would be for generating. It was very hard to understand what the reasoning would be for using Sunder Soul as an ability, right? Unless you wanted to avoid giving your opponent's Vanguard units their veterancy, right? Or you wanted to make sure that you spawned your 2 Fiends instead of giving a Fiend to your opponent because your unit was infested. In both of those circumstances, it became prohibitive to do this past a very small number of units. So I like that now basically you get their max Veil. You get 15 health. So Veil is now 25% of the unit. So you get the extra, and so it's a 60/15 unit. Now you basically get 25% more unit if you use Sunder Soul, as opposed to it just spawns by death. I love that Fiends don't spawn with 50% of their Veil anymore. That felt like such arbitrary bullshit, especially since they just decrease Veil over time, which you didn't care about. They lost something like 2% of their Veil, of their max Veil per second, which you didn't care about if they were automatically dying and getting into combat anyways. You just want them to live a little bit longer, so this is actually a pretty sizable nerf. This is a sizable nerf to base Fiends. Like, you are losing 7.5, you are losing 12.5% of their health. Basically, base case scenario, the Fiends have lost 12.5% of their health. Skillfully, they've gained 12.5% of their health. Nice. Movement speed increased from 6 to 7. Yeah, we're really sorry that Scouts and other units were faster than Fiends. We didn't like that. We would like Fiends to be more powerful. So I don't like this. The reason I don't like this is that the Gaunt is still a problem. The Gaunt having Infest by default means that any Fiends that you generate using your Gaunts to go ahead and get Infest are now even faster than they used to be, which means they can traverse the map more quickly, which means they can attack your opponent more quickly, which means snowballs are even worse than Infernal be Infernal. So I don't like this. I think the real source of this is that you just should not have Infest on Gaunts. I think they're going to have a lot of problems with this throughout the next coming, the coming weeks, the coming months, and maybe even the coming years, until eventually we're going to get. There was a YouTube comment about how there was a video on Infest which said, well, people don't like free units, and the response that was given by Frost Giant Studios, right, courtesy of Monk, was, well, people say they don't like free units, but it's really because they didn't like the Brood War, the Infested Terran, and the Swarm Host, and those had different problems, and their problems, and I'm trying to present his argument as well as possible here. He said that their problems were as follows: the Broodlords were actually too effective against ground, and the path blocking of the Broodlings made it less likely that you could go and fight the Broodlords themselves. People didn't like infested Terrans from the Infestor because the problem is that you could spawn 4 of them at once. Just bam, make a bunch of them, and you could exceed the cap of army supply. That was the problem people had with them. And then the problem with the Swarm Host is that even if you killed the Locusts, you couldn't actually get on top of the Swarm Host very easily, who were constantly generating the value. And though if I had to take that apart, and go back to its base principle or its roots, what he's really saying is the problem with free units is that the way that it can be spawned consistently and freely was the problem. Broodlords did it with every attack. Swarmhost did it with every attack. Infested Terrans could stockpile a shit ton of them and then make them all at once, right? And so what he's saying there is, well, actually, Gaunts are not that much of a problem because, yes, they do make units with their basic attack, but only if they kill the unit, and it's not like they make it with every basic attack. I disagree, fundamentally. I think that as people get better, Fiends, and especially now that Fiends have more speed, Any one fiend you have can be used for scouting. They don't die because of their unstable mass ability anymore, so you can scout camps with them, you can scout expansions with them. Yeah, right now we're seeing people ball them up together and try to kill your opponent with them, but I think that that's going to be fixed very soon. Not in terms of balance, but in terms of the playstyle. People are just going to realize, wait a second, I have a free unit I can use to scout thirds and fourths and vision camps and see what my opponent's army movement is and sit outside of their natural and etc. 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 And we're already seeing that in certain very strong games that you can watch elsewhere on YouTube. So I don't like it. Eventually, I think there was a YouTube comment, and I do agree with it, that said something to the effect of, one of these days we're going to get an interview, and he's going to say, yeah, the problem with the Fiends, the problem with Infest is just that it made free units. I think that that is really what's going to happen. I think that Fiends operate under a bad case of something I call designer brain. I'll explain what designer brain is fully and give some examples in a later video, but designer brain in a nutshell is when you think that you can come up with something and it's just not so, but you have a lot of reasons you can give as to why it might be so, but they all are contradicted by reality, right? So you hear this a lot when people are talking about how something might theoretically work out. Like, okay, so I was playing a game with somebody, and there was a unit that moved at a certain speed, but it was very fragile. And then that unit got blown up, and the player was very frustrated. Now, somebody else said, well, actually, that's not the way that that would work. And I'm telling them, I've watched the games, that's the way it in fact did work, and that's the source of the other player's frustration. Just because you can posit a scenario that would be less frustrating or you think should work a certain way doesn't mean it actually will work that way. The unintended second order consequences mean it's a problem. And actually, considering that Frost Giant Studios has put a lot of emphasis on new player experience, people new to RTS, I just don't think that the way that Infest works is actually, I think it's caustic, actually, to the way that those new players experience the game, and that might be the lens through which they eventually decide to, if not remove Fest, at least remove Infest as the default ability of the Gaunt. Gaunt weapon bounce range decreased from 5 to 3.5. This doesn't matter. that sounds horrible, but it doesn't matter. The reason it doesn't matter is that it's trying to solve the problem from the wrong angle. It's saying, well, the Gaunt's attack glaive doesn't bounce as far, therefore it shouldn't infest as many people, therefore people can retreat, they can split, they have some counterplay. But in a full army engagement where you want DPS density, that's not what happens. So I don't think, while this is a nerf to the Gaunt, this is the most minor of bullshit tiny, irrelevant nerfs. It means nothing. One second. Yeah, this does nothing. And when I say it does nothing, I'm not using hyperbole. I mean, the only scenario I can think of in which the 5 to 3.5 bounce range changes is if it automatically bounced an infinite number of times. If the bounce happened an infinite number of times to all units in range, decreasing the range to which that happens, I guess, is better. But at any army size above about 10 units for both players, this is meaningless. Also, creeps are stupid right now. They will dogpile and grab onto a single units that can aggro that are in front of them. I don't see how this helps in the slightest. Doombringer. Doombringer can load units while in mobilized mode. Good, because it was extremely frustrating before that it could not. I get what they were going for. Oh, it's a support tower, and then you can only load it in when it's actually deployed flat. But again, that was extremely frustrating for newer players. And it just created an APM tax for a basic use of the mechanic and the ability. Nobody liked that. So I'm glad it was changed. The inner radius was decreased from 0.5 to 0.1, and the outer radius was decreased from 1 to 0.5. They're basically trying to make Gaunt drops. They're trying to make Gaunt drops worse, but make the pickup better. And I think this is because they realize that evacs are just way better than Doombringers. I know, Omega hot take, but I wasn't known for not having that. I love this change, by the way, because I found this in day one of the beta. I thought it was sick. So the Magmadon, consume cooldown increased from 0.25 to 5 seconds. You want to know what this is? You cannot kill a Magmadon, especially a defensive Magmadon. You could not kill it. It was not happening. Consume cooldown, like, because every 0.25 seconds, so you have meat farms, and meat farms generate a fell hog every 20 seconds. And if you had, I think it was 2 or 3 meat farms, your Magmadon would just be impervious to death. You could not kill it. It was way too strong. And also, it recovers something like 50 to 100% of its white health or its veil. And it was a 480 health unit. So that's quite a lot of veil. That's quite a lot of force that you're generating. And it was cool that you could consume and keep the unit alive. I really liked that, actually. The problem is that counterplay-wise, your only solution to this was to burst the Magmadon down so quickly that it died before it could get another consumable target, and that just wouldn't happen, right? And so here's the thing, this only affects, if I'm literally, in terms of MMR, the top 1.5% of players, this probably only affects like the top 0.5% of players. Like, if you are bad, or if you don't think that you're good, or if you don't even think that you're great, this will not impact you at the slightest. Like, you will already be forgetting what to do in these scenarios for the Magmadon recharge. Right, for the consume cooldown. It's not going to bother you. All it does is it makes it so that if you're getting hit with a big attack and you're trying to eke out all maximum value of your units, your Magmadons won't be immortal, right? Because they could just consume an imp or a fell hog previously and be fine. So, Hellborns. Another thing I want to say about this is actually this makes Magmadons vastly worse. How to say? So we were seeing scenarios in which Infernal players would defend heavily on 3 bases and then get very high-tech units. And then the Magmadon was kind of a linchpin unit that it would attack, and then it would run away, and attack, it would run away. And you would use the consume ability to make sure that when you attacked and you ran away, that you were capable of getting all of your veil back, so you weren't taking any permanent damage on your very expensive, high-tech, good-tech tier units. And so that will make this worse there. So again, if you're like the top 0.5% of all players, this will affect you, and you will feel its effects very, very strongly, especially Infernal v Vanguard. Otherwise, you will not. All right, Hellborne. Lots of changes here. There was a helpful Reddit post below this that got into what all these changes meant, but we'll go on to it in a second. Hellborne supply cost increased from 5 to 8, and cost increased from 150 to 150 to 250 to 25. So from 5 to 8 to 8 to 5 is an increase of 60%, right? So you've got an increase of 60% supply cost increase, another 66% slash 50%. Okay, so it's supply. It is now more supply efficient for cost than it used to be, but its health was only increased, let's see, 30%. And its damage was increased from 30 plus 40 to 50 plus 50. So, I'm going to say this is overall okay, we have to figure this out. So this is a 30% this is a 60% increase in supply for a 66% increase in Luminite and a 50% increase in Therium, right? So, one second. It is now more efficient on Therium than it used to be, and it's less efficient on Luminite than it used to be for supply. But in exchange for a 60% nerf, because a supply increase is just a nerf, right? In exchange for a 60% nerf in supply, it got a 30% buff and a 40%-ish, or a 30%, near 50. It's over 50, in fact. So they got like a 60% increase. So their cost and their damage are good changes in terms of they equal out each other. It's more efficient on Therium and less efficient on Luminite than it used to be. It's not as healthy as it should. It's half as healthy as it should be for the changes. And then the splash damage was, it says that it was increased, but really it's just doing 50% of what the base values are, which means that its splash is more effective. So Thank you, Charlotte, for joining the beta. I'm glad you found this useful. If you got any questions, we're nearly at the end of it. We're doing a pretty quick one, but I'm trying to figure out. So 60% increase, so it's more Ethereum efficient than it used to be, and it has half the health gain that you would expect. In compensation, it's getting a 50% increase in army-based, a 60% increase in army-based damage. So it's got half the health it should, and 100% of the damage that it should, and 100% of the... Yeah, so all in all, I'm going to say it's a nerf. Like, people aren't going to like that that's what I'm saying, but all in all, it is a nerf. So when you go from 5 to 8, we just find that the easiest multiple between the two of them is 40. So previously, right, 8 of them would cost... So previously, 8 of them would cost you 1,200, right? And now they cost you 1,250 and 1,275, right? So that's a nerf. And then if we look at them previously, they go from 1,600 effective hit points to 1,300 effective hit points. They lose 300 hit points. And then the damage they're getting, it goes from 240 plus 320, so 240 versus army, which is what they were mostly used for, right, to 250. And then the splash damage is the same. So yeah, I'm gonna call this a nerf overall, right? Slightly good values on the relative to supply for its cost. It's kind of fair. The problem is that you are just increasing the cost, and you're decreasing the health that you get out of these units effectively based on that. So yeah, it's a nerf. Basically, what they're also trying to do is make this a unit that's not as massable, right? Because you have to think about what the consequence is. It's not just the difference in having 8 of them versus 5 of them under the new costs. So 8 of them on supply cost is 40 supply, and that 40 supply was getting you the 240 damage. Now you have to make them in discrete increments of 8, which means that killing each one is more painful than it used to be. I still don't think that this is actual... Well... It might not be a nerf, actually, because when their supply is greater like this, and they get damage that corresponds, damage and cost increases that correspond almost directly and scale multiplicatively to the differences, I actually think this is a buff. That's crazy. And here's why. So Hellspawn Resurgence just gives you all the cards back, right? Up to 3, recharges up to 3 full cards. And so previously, if you got 3 full cards back of your Hellborne and you could afford it, you were getting 15 back, 15 supply of an army back, and now you're getting 24 supply of an army back. So in a vacuum, I think it's a small nerf because of the health, right? And it's a nerf because each individual unit is more expensive, therefore losing the unit is worse, but the damage is compensatory, right? It's 10 damage higher than it should be. But that's fine, right? For when we're talking about 8, when we're talking about 5 new Hellborns. But I actually think this is a buff because if you're Infernals and you have the resources, you would rather your units cost 10 supply than that they cost 1 supply. Because anything that's expensive, you get more Animus for, right? So more supply means you get more Animus whenever the unit dies. And then the more expensive a thing is in supply, the more you don't care, because as long as the supply is compensated for cost and damage, but especially damage, then you're getting the same amount of damage out of... You're getting the same amount of damage out of 5 of the new Hellborns you were out of 8 of the previous ones, except Hellborne Resurgence gets you 3/5 of the Hellborns you were going to make now, as opposed to 3/8. So you go from getting 37.5% of the damage that you would out of this 40 supply of Hellborns to getting 60% of the damage you would get out of the 40 supply of Hellborns. So I actually think this is a buff. This is crazy. This also speaks to me that they want this to be a more late game tier 3 techie unit. And they also wanted to make it that when you lose each individual one, it is a more painful loss. Whereas right now, if you see your opponent has 5 Hellborns and you can only kill one of them, you're like, oh shit, that's real bad. But if your opponent has 3 Hellborns and you kill one of them, that feels like you've accomplished something great, grand, and wonderful. I just think that the Resurgence ability means that it's better for Infernals to have high supply units than it is for them to have low supply units, right? Okay, cool. We're going to move my face So we can see this section right here. All right. That was really cool of you, Charlotte. I appreciate that. I don't know why you did that, but I still appreciate you. Okay, so we're going to get into the last changes right here. Here we go. Shadow Flower. The Shadow Flower now deals 125 damage to its primary target and 50 damage in an area of 3, down from 125 in the entire area. This is a nerf. This is a massive nerf. I don't understand why you would buff the evac and then buff its ability to defend against the Shadow Flyers and then nerf the Shadow Flyers. I think I know why, though. There was a very famous clip that happened with Artosis, and a couple of other people had similar clippable moments where he just lost like a dozen Spriggans due to 3 Shadow Flyers or something hilarious like that. And they probably thought it was a bad look on the game that happened. But the real problem is that I just don't know what Shadow Flyers are now supposed to do against Infernals or against I don't know what they're supposed to. They look like they'll be worse against Spriggans. They'll be worse against each other in the ball like fight meta. Actually, they have 50 health now. They have 60 health up from 50. So this means that your one Shadow Flyer can't just kill all of their Shadow Flyers. And I'm pretty sure that's the interaction they're thinking of. But the problem I'm having with this is, how are you ever going to catch things like Hornets or how are you ever going to catch things like Hornets or Evacs now? I just don't get it. I just don't think it's very good. And then the Weaver, lash cooldown increased from 12 seconds to 16 seconds, so this is a 33% nerf. Lash damage changed from 60 to 20% of a unit's max health, so we need to think about how this all translates. So when you go from lash increase from 12 seconds to 16 seconds, the damage would have to go from 60 to 80 to be compensatory. Or that means to do as much as it was doing previously. So what it's doing now, in order for this to be a buff, lash damage has the lash damage of 20% of a unit's max health has to be greater than 80, which means the unit has to have more than 400 health in order for the Weaver changes to actually make it more powerful. That just means now that the Weaver is going to be more effective against. The Weaver's going to be less effective against small units and more effective against strong individual units like the Vulcan, right? Vulcans, Atlases, other Weavers, Magmadons. Basically, if you have more than 400 health, then Lash is doing more. If you have less than 400 health, then Lash is doing less to the target than it did previously. Part of the reason it's not doing 60 anymore is that 60 was just 40% of the health of a unit like an Exo. Right, you would just completely wreck an Exo by lashing it before anything else even attacked it. And consume cooldown increase from 0.25 to 5 is, again, an understanding that you are trying to make this game a little bit easier. It's going to make it easier for the people who are not... It's going to offer more counterplay against this unit to the top 0.5 or 0.25% of players who are actually noticing the difference between 0.25 and 5 seconds on consume cooldown and use it often enough that they feel it's hurt. This is also an admission, by the way, that consume just needs to be an upgrade. I predict we're going to see consume get made into an ability that goes up into not the Shroudstone, the Shadow Cleft, or the Ritual Chamber, something like that, right? They're actually just going to make this an ability, because if you nerf it too much, it just becomes a not useful main ability, and then you lose the identity of Consume as part of the faction. So I think what you're really going to do is they're going to move Consume. If it were me, I would have them move Consume to an upgrade, and then have Consume as an upgrade be something that's like, gives the Consume ability to Weavers and Magmadons. And it's like, oh yes, that sounds great. So, if we had to go through the entire thing, if we're looking through all of this, buffs and nerfs, bunch of good bug fixes, but a lot of the bug fixes are actually nerfs to a bunch of the bug fixes are actually nerfs to Infernals. It is good that scouts are no longer oppressive. That means that Vanguard is going to have a hard time because they're going to have to get off of easy mode and figure out what the start of the game now looks like for them, or what changes they have to make the Scout not the premier and most dominant unit ever. By the way, eventually we're going to get to the point where the starting unit, the Scout, is actually the starting unit for the Vanguard players are not going to be a Scout. It's going to be some kind of unique heroic unit that itself can't be upgraded or changed or affected. That's going to be the actual long-term solution to all of these Scout problems that we are seeing here in the nerfs. Medtechs were goated, as I said, and they're still really strong even though there's 3 supply. Hedgehogs Vulcan's got another nerf. Vulcan's got another buff. Evac's got another buff. Hornets were made worse, but defenses also got a buff. And if we look at Infernals, we see a nerf, a nerf, and then the brute changes for fiends is actually a nerf to baseline play and a buff to higher level play to a 7.5%, no, to a 12.5% health change in both directions. Gaunts were nerfed, but it doesn't matter. Doombringers were buffed. Magmadons were nerfed. Hellborns were overall buffed, but only because of the specific interaction with Hellspawn Resurgence. Shadowflyers were nerfed, and Weavers were on the whole nerfed. So once again, Vanguard got buffed. Most of the bug fixes are buffs for Vanguards, and your boys over here, the Infernals, are getting nerfed in some subtle ways, in some massive ways. I predict that we're going to get to the point soon where it's just going to be too much. I'm looking forward to seeing what the changes are. And again, biggest problem that I have, why are you doing all these changes ahead of the final week of the EGC Stormgate Open 10K? Makes absolutely no sense, and just looks like it's going to be an opportunity for all things to fall in the face. Because you definitely don't want players to say anything like, actually, I qualified, but everything got nerfed, and now I can't play the way that I used to. It's going to sound absolutely terrible. So that's it, everyone. That's the Elephant Patch Notes for February 13th. I hope you found that interesting. We're going to call it a short one. Get back to some other things, take a bit of soda, take a bit of a break, and head out. All right. Thanks, everyone. Bye.